Okay, it's 4, but I think a few people are not yet here, so we're going to give them a couple of minutes and then we're going to take the plunge.
Very much point.
Miriam. Someone just come. Yep, Matt. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the week 3 discussion of fences. Pat, I see your hands up. You want to take the plunge early?
Just a little minor thing.
Hmm.
I really liked your email about how some of the minor players in fences were characters in other plays by August Wilson, but I think you missed one, and that was Pope, who, if you remember in Jitney, he had scored, I don't know what the term is on the numbers, bought a fancy car, and his restaurant was being closed down because of the urban renewal.
Yes, I think I included Pope. Let's see. But if not, I will
You
include Pope.
did,
Uh-huh.
you did, but on some other play which I haven't read yet.
Oh, yeah. I will make a note of that in the text. Pope in 7 Guitars was also in Jitney. In Jitney.
Right. So Troy is complaining about how Pope in his restaurant is giving all the white customers in his stew
The meat.
all the meat,
That's right.
and the black customers the carrots and the potatoes.
Right, right.
And then when you go to Jitney, he won, or whatever the term is,
He hit the
the
number.
numbers.
Hmm.
He bought a fancy car, but he's closing his restaurant because of the urban renewal there.
Right, right. So let's formally start with a short synopsis, and then we'll go where the algorithm leads us, so to speak. So the protagonist of this play is Troy Maxim. Um, Fences is different from from Wilson's other plays, all of them, in fact, in that it has a central protagonist as opposed to an ensemble of players of actors playing different roles, but no one is quite the star. In Fences, it's all about Troy. It could be the story of Troy, for that matter. Troy works on a garbage truck. It's hard work. Um, Troy migrated north to Pittsburgh from Alabama. He gets involved in a life of crime. He doesn't have a job. He can't support himself other than through robbing people. Admit, and he ends up in a botched robbery that results in a murder, and he goes to jail for uh, what is it, 23 years. And while Troy is in jail, he learns about baseball. Now we can talk about the history of baseball later, but baseball and prison have an interesting history, I've been told. At any rate, he meets Bono while he's incarcerated. They get released and they work together on the garbage truck. Troy, between being released and getting a job on the garbage truck, uh, becomes a player in the Negro Baseball League. But then when the league integrates and basically the Negro League dissolves shortly after integration, Troy is too old, or is told he's too old to play in the pro league, um, and he's very bitter about that. Um, Troy is married to Rose, who keeps him pretty much on the straight and narrow, or we would like to think. And Rose is a very steadying influence. Rose is a harbor. Rose is a sanctuary for a lot of people who need care, and um, Rose is very stable. Troy has two sons. One is Lyons, who's a son by a former relationship, who grew up mainly while Troy was incarcerated. And Troy has a son with Rose, Corey, who lives in the house and is trying to establish his way, his path. Troy's athletic as his father was, and he thinks he has a future in collegiate football. But Troy thinks he doesn't, or Troy doesn't want him to be overwhelmed by false promises, and so gives him some rather tough choices to make that end up eliminating football from his future. Lyons, for his part, is a musician who can't keep a job and has some lines rather reminiscent of Ma Rainey when he says that music is something that enables him to get up out of bed in the morning. But in the stage direction, we know that he's not that great a musician, although he plays at Crawford's Grill, where, by the way, um, uh, August Wilson heard John Coltrane play in his young adulthood, in his youth. Um, so Troy has a wandering eye, and he spots this woman from Tallahassee, where I went to college, Tallahassee, named Alberta. And he starts to hanging out with Alberta on the side, uh, and he impregnates Alberta. So he brings that news home to Rose that he has a girlfriend who's pregnant, and Rose's reaction is what one might expect. Um, but when Alberta dies in childbirth, Troy brings the baby home, Raynell, and Rose consents to raising the child. Maybe I think, and she alludes as much to the fact that she always wanted a daughter, and for some reason didn't have any children after Corey. So Raynell is kind of an answer to her prayers, but she has decided that although she's going to raise Troy's daughter with Alberta, that Troy has to make a sacrifice that she says, and she says, this child is going to have a mother, but you are going to be a womanless man. And if you've seen this play in the stage, when she says, and you are going to be a womanless man, the crowd kind of roars in a muted kind of way. It's kind of interesting. Um, Troy has conflicts with Corey. He ends up putting Corey out of the house. Interesting backstory about how that was scripted, but nonetheless, um, Troy leaves. I'm sorry, Corey leaves. Troy retires. Troy gets old. Troy dies. I'm not spoiling for anybody because everybody's read the play. Troy dies, and his death reunites the family. Um, it brings Gabriel back from the hospital. It brings Corey in from the Marine Corps. It gets Lyons released from his sentence at the workhouse, and the family is reunited once again. And that's pretty much the play in a nutshell, although there are lots of ins and outs. Where shall we start? The story is rich in relationships. The story is rich in outside, sort of external, exogenous circumstances. There are lots of different directions. Um, and if no one has any preference, I'd like to start with Troy and Bono. Troy and Bono and their relationship. What do you all think about Troy and Bono? Go ahead, Pat.
Um, Bono obviously has loved Troy, and he makes it really clear. They were in prison together. And then he respects the fact that Troy left prison and married Rose, and Bono marries his wife, Lucille. But Bono cannot get his head around Troy's relationship with Alberta, or he doesn't want to deal with it. He knows about it, it's clear. But he kind of doesn't really want to deal with it. It's different from what he thought Troy was, because there's no reason from Bono's standpoint that Troy would not continue to love Alberta and be truthful to her and the life that they have built up there, which is really what Troy is, or Bono was looking at, not the relationship, but the life and the responsibility. And so that's where it goes as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Troy is aware that I'm sorry, Bono is aware that Troy has this relationship with Alberta, and he warns him against it. Go ahead, Laurie.
I kind of saw it a little bit differently. I really liked the two of them. I thought they were such good friends, and they had been through a lot together. And I did love when Bono spoke up to Troy, because he didn't want him to ruin his life. And on one hand, it seems like Bono had kind of taken the safe route. He didn't have kids. He kind of seemed like more of a follower, both of Troy and maybe even Lucille. And he recognized that Troy was not like that. Troy was more of a leader, but so yeah, it was kind of heartbreaking when he had to say, hey, he tried to save his buddy from messing up his relationship with Rose, because he saw how wonderful Rose was. But I think he got him and did his best. And then when he stayed away from him, the way I read into that is it was probably hard for him to be around him, knowing he was messing up his life after they had gotten things on the straight and narrow together. He and Troy had gotten things on the straight and narrow.
Yeah,
at the same time, kind of in a way.
I think that Bono had a relationship with Troy that went back to their time of incarceration, but I think Bono had a sincere and solid friendship with Rose, and that led him to want to see Troy do the right thing. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I agree with Laurie. I thought that he did repeatedly try to warn Troy off on Alberta. But I also thought he played another important function. I mean, you had Troy going on about himself, but what Bono was able to do in talking to other characters is establish that, in fact, Troy was a great baseball player, and they did have a great career in the Negro Leagues. Otherwise, in the play, it would have just been Troy bragging. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I felt that he did admire him greatly, and he made it clear to me as an audience member that, okay, this is true. Troy was a great baseball player. He was too old when it got time to integrate the major leagues, but he still felt he could be a better center fielder than
Some
this
of
guy
them.
Selkirk.
That is Selkirk.
Even 53 years old, whoever
Yeah.
Selkirk was.
Yeah.
So I mean, you had the one guy bragging, but you had the other guy at least confirming that in his prime, he was a great baseball player. And that's important, I think, because if you don't believe that, then nothing would make sense, I don't think, in the play.
Mhm, mhm. Thanks, Ed. Marlene.
I think what I loved about the relationship between Troy and Bono to me sort of was like a surrogate uncle. He was family to Troy, probably the closest person to Troy besides Rose. And Bono was his conscience, even though Troy didn't listen to him. But I loved how Bono was direct when he was protesting about there not being drivers for any black drivers for their company, to the trash truck.
Mhm.
And he said, Troy, you don't even have a driver's license. You can't even read. Let's be real here. Why are you protesting about there no black driver? You can't drive. And even when Troy thought, well, I can learn, Bono was very direct in letting him know it's not as easy as you think it is. And I loved every time Troy was rude to his son, Bono would say, why are you like that? Why are you talking like that? Why are you doing that? Lighten up, be easy. So he called him on his stuff, not all the time, but enough. And he definitely, with Alberta, it was clear what he was doing. And he says, I'm not stupid. I see what you're doing. And I love Rose and I love you guys. And I want that, honor your wife and honor your relationship. And that's a true friend to call you on your stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and I can definitely tell Bono, he was heartbroken. I'm sure after he had that talk with Troy and then the baby shows up, I guess he said, I'm done. I'm just done. But he still, would come around occasionally. But he was, to me, he reminded me of an uncle for Troy's sons.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I have a theory, and we can come back to it later. I have a theory that not only did Bono know about Alberta, but Corey and Rose knew about Alberta. It's just a theory, and it's something that I kind of have extracted from the text. We'll talk about it later. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I appreciated what Marlene said about Bono, and I think that just to add to that, I think it's important that it was every Friday evening that they would get together and drink at the end of the work week and talk about issues at work, talk about trying to get their union to, do what was right, and things like that. And so I just think the sort of consistent, Friday get together was a sort of grounding part for all of the sort of interjections that Marlene raised, on the part of Bono.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It was pretty interesting that after the baby came, Bono stopped hanging out at Troy's house on Friday afternoons. They stopped having that regular drink. Let me pause and bring up Miriam, I think was next, and then Barbara. Then Corinne.
Well, I guess it struck me that Troy was such a magnetic figure, and he had so much charisma. Sometimes, when he did all his storytelling, and he'd always say, right, Bono, right, Bono. So Bono was sort of there to validate him, as somebody else said. but also as kind of the sidekick, a sort of very, a much more moral personality. Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
We have you. We
Yeah.
have it. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. I think I just got a call, but anyway, so I just sort of saw him as a needed side character to bounce off the magnetism, the larger than life kind of personality of Troy. And a lot of times I felt he was kind of a yes man in a way, because he was caught in that sort of magnetic field that Troy sets up, as Rose was caught in it too, with a lot of admiration, not always deserved admiration, for this incredible magnetic figure. So that's what I thought.
Thanks, Miriam. Go ahead, Barbara, and Corinne is next.
I saw Bono as Troy's support system, his buddy, as everybody has already said. I'm interested to hear what you have to say later on about how you thought Rose and Corey knew about this affair he was having, because I didn't see that coming. I did not see. I mean, I saw the affair, but I didn't see that. I didn't see Rose and Corey knowing that. But I just enjoyed the play so much. And I didn't see the movie, and I really loved the play. I think that's all I have to say.
Okay. Corinne?
I love the friendship between these two men, and they're the only friendship that's in the play, except for the relatives coming together and being camaraderie, whatever the word is. And it was beautiful to see. And of course, we know it started in prison, where you could have this tight. You needed a friend in prison, but he needed a friend. Troy needed a friend outside too, and his life sort of fell apart when Raynell came into the family. But something interesting, I can't find the quote, but it was Bono who talks about fences let friends in and out and keep things in and out. And
Yes.
I thought that was very interesting, that he's got the name of the play, which I think is also very interesting. And I think it was also to keep death out.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. So my theory, has everybody spoken who wants to talk about Bono? Here's my theory. At the beginning of scene 3, act 1, scene 3, Rose and Corey are talking. And Corey mentions, Rose says, you're supposed to help your dad with his fence. And Corey says, he's been saying that for the last 4 or 5 Saturdays, and then he don't never do nothing about it, but go down to Taylor's,
Oh.
where he ostensibly is watching the game. But go down to Taylor's might suggest that Corey knows something fishy is going on that's preventing even Troy from working on the fence that he claims he wants. And then later on, Corey enters the house, Roy enters the yard, sneaks up behind Rose and grabs her. And Rose says, Troy, go on now. You like to scare me to death. And she says, what was the score of the game? Did y'all catch that? She said, since you've been at a baseball game,
Yeah.
since you've been at a baseball game, what
Right.
was the score of the game?
Yeah.
And he says, what I care about the game. Come here, woman, and tries to kiss her to change her mind or change the conversation. I think there she knows that something has gone off track, and he's using the visit to Taylor's. And then later on, Corey says, Pop, why don't we buy a television? Since you're going down to the Taylor's to watch television all the time, why can't we get our own television? I think that's Corey's subconscious way of saying, Dad, stay with Mom, stay home, stay with us. Don't be tiptoeing out. But that's reading a lot between the lines. We're talking heavy, heavy intertextuality here. And I could be dead wrong. It's just a theory.
No.
Madeline, I see your
I
hand
think
up.
it fits.
Yeah, I thought that Corey also said the Pirates won. So he made it clear that he knew what the score was. So I thought that, but I thought I raised my hand before, but I didn't, about going back to Bono. Just one
Yes.
thing. It's not really just about Bono, but about the Troy relationship or how things changed with Troy. I think when he started to drive the truck, his relationship changed
Mhm.
with Bono as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
He had risen
Good point.
to some extent, and even Troy admitted that it wasn't the same because he didn't have the same relationship with the guys that he did before. So I think that that change, as well as the baby, a lot of things changed
A lot
in
of
their
things changed.
relationship.
Yeah. It's not a static relationship at all. It's very, very dynamic. I noticed that. Go ahead, Sheila.
Hi, I just wanted to agree with what other people had said about the relationship between them, but put another kind of side on it. That's Troy's heroism from the very first time I saw the movie 5 years ago or whenever. I really saw Troy as somebody really trying to be, to be the man, to be heroic, to do what he needed to do, that he believed was important. And when I read this, can I read a small part of a quote from the play that validates what I want to say about that? I think how does a person who lives in a racist society like they were living, and even like we're living today, maintain being a hero, a Black man? And I heard in this Bono quote, I'm just going to read part of it. When you picked Rose, I was happy for you. That was the first time I knew you had any sense. I said, my man Troy knows what he's doing. I'm going to follow him. He might take me somewhere. I've been following you. I done learned a whole heap of things about life watching you. I learned how to tell where the shit lies, how to tell it from the alfalfa. You done learned me a lot of things. You showed me how to not make the same mistakes, to take life as it comes along and keep putting one foot in front of the other. Rose is a good woman, Troy. I just felt that that's saying, I see your heroism. I see who you are. And that's the sad thing when that got broken between them to me.
We Paula, did you have your hand up? Yes, Paula.
Well, I had two things I wanted to say. One is a very small observation, and that is that at the end of the play, Rose actually calls Bono Jim, which I had to sort of go back and go, who's Jim? And but I think it's a sign of Rose's friendship with him, her trust of him, her intimacy as a friend, that's different than Troy's. The other thing I think that's really important to think about is what kind of hero is Troy? Because I have to say, I don't know if any of you know this book, but it's really quite wonderful if you haven't read it. It's Black Folktales by Julius Lester. And in it, it's a bunch of folk tales that grew out of an oral tradition, but Troy reminded me of Stagger Lee. Stagger Lee, who is always defying death, he has the same kind of braggadocio, and Troy is, in his own eyes, he's a hero, but I'm not so sure he's a hero to anybody who really loves him. And I see that speech of Bono's that ends up by saying Rose is a good woman. as the way he's softening Troy up to deliver a truth to him. And he's saying, you know, recalling Troy to who he wanted to be. And then he kind of hits him with this truth that Rose is a good, he doesn't say you should be better to Rose, but he does say she's a good woman, as though he trusts his friend to get the message. But, you know, all that define of death is just Stagger Lee right on that arrogance. And, you know, Corey points it out to him. I mean, he's blind as Oedipus was to the truths around him because he has such great belief in himself. You know, what do I care if I don't have a driver's license? I'll be able to drive. And I know this grows out of a deep wound, but, you know, I found it almost unbearable to read when he tells Rose about Alberta, because he's bullying. He says, you know, I laugh with her. I'm not going to give
Yeah.
that. I'm thinking, why tell her? It's enough that you've said, you know, she's pregnant with somebody. Why go on to say, even at the soul level? He never says, how are you, Rose? How are you doing? So I think it's important to consider what kind of hero.
That was a good catch, Paul. I didn't catch the fact that Rose referred to Bono as Jim as they were preparing for the funeral, and that really revealed the friendship relationship that they had. People have a side note. There was an interesting conversation in Twitter yesterday about August Wilson, about fences, and about toxic masculinity. And if you go to Twitter and type in August Wilson, it'll come up. It was an interesting conversation. And a few people have written about Troy and about toxic masculinity, whether or not he represented that. And it's an interesting discussion. My thing with Troy is that Troy has a cruelty edge to him. Troy refuses to tell Corey that he loves him or he likes him. He insists on saying that what he does is only because of his duty, his responsibility, with no emotional attachment. And Troy is actually cruel to Rose when he talks about how good he feels when he's with Alberta. It's cruel. It shows no regard for Rose's feelings at all. And as soon as Rose turns it back around and says, you know, you give, but you also take, then he wants to get all aggravated and excited. And that's a whole nother story. But you know, Troy's an interesting character. Corinne, and then Marlene.
I just wanted to say that just to poke a little hole in your theory, Ray, because there are so many difficult, heartfelt speeches in this, unbearable, I think Paula said. So it's, the other one was when Corey is ordered out of the house. And you would think that Corey would say, and you had this affair, the way he said, Gabe, it was Gabe's money that bought this house. So I think he might have punched back if he knew about his father's affair. So that was just one little point.
Thanks, Corinne. Marlene.
Troy's character was definitely really complex, but yeah, I didn't like Troy's character. I really did not like Troy at all. It broke my heart the way he crushed Corey's dreams, and he was very bitter. And, you know, all folks go through life with hardship. We all do. And it's, you know, the things that happen to us in life, how we overcome them, to me, builds your character more than playing a victim and being so vindictive. He was, to me, he came across, it's all about me and I'm going to get what I want no matter what. And he really did. I mean, Rose was such a loving woman. And the way the things he did to his son, and he never softened. Generally, when you see characters like Troy, there's a little glimmer. I guess the glimmer was when he brought the baby home and he sat on that porch, and there was some humility there. I think that was the only time I saw some humility, when he brought that baby home and sat on the porch, and he was saying we don't have a home, and he was talking loud so Rose could hear him inside. So that was the only time I saw a glimmer of humanity to me. Otherwise, he was just, toxic masculinity. I think that's an excellent description. Troy. I mean, when you do what he did to his wife and just it was like he was sticking the knife in her and turning it every time he talked about that relationship and what this woman did for him. And he was just a very selfish, he was very bitter. He was bitter. He was bitter from things that happened to him. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm the type of person, life happens. How do I respond to it? And what am I going to do to have the kind of life I want? I know he couldn't control everything, but he did not have to tear his sons down the way he did. He was just super, super negative.
Yeah. Rosalie, I've seen your hand.
Yeah, he was cruel and selfish and self-centered, but then you think to yourself, well, why? And then you think of his role model, his father, who was very cruel. And he left at 14. He left home, he left his cruel environment, and he had to be a survivor. So I think what a survivor does is they really get tough and self-centered. Otherwise, they can't be strong and survive. I'm not saying that's an excuse for his behavior, but it might be, a reason why he was so nasty. And then what his father did to the girl that he was making love to, I mean, beyond cruel. And then beating Troy up, and then so Troy, I will say the good news is, I don't know if I'd call it good news, but he did learn from his father to be responsible for his family and be hardworking. And he talks about that later, how those are two very important values to him. He is so mean to his sons. He takes no interest in Lyon's musicianship, wanting to see him play. And Lyon says so many times, hey, Dad, come see me, and he doesn't. He doesn't seem to go to any of Corey's practices either. And as someone said, he doesn't seem to take any interest in Rose and how she feels, although she does manage the money, which I thought was kind of interesting. He always handed over his paycheck at the end of the week. And then again, he got angry at her when she talked about giving, that she brings to light that how selfish he is and that he's not giving. And, then he gets very defensive because he feels he's supporting her and the family and doing a good job as a husband in that regard. But I guess that's all I'm going to say. I'll give somebody else a chance.
Okay. Madeline, I see your hand's been up, and then Laurie.
Yeah, I've been thinking about articles or interviews with August Wilson and how much Troy is August Wilson. The anger and the disappointment in baseball, those are the two things that strike me. I mean, from the interviews, it seems that August Wilson was never that loving with his wives or children. then his disappointment with baseball when he was 16 and playing with the team, and then his coach put his son in, and from that point he just never played baseball again. So I think that experience, those experiences, and August Wilson's father being sort of absent, and him not having the good father figure to look up to, informed the Troy character.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting about August Wilson's father, Frederick Kittle. Not only was he an absentee father, but he actually had a separate family.
Oh.
So he had his black family with Daisy, and August and his siblings, and he had a white family. Very few people actually pick up on that, but a few biographers have. He was an interesting guy. Go ahead, Laurie, and we'll come back to Paula and Miriam and Rosalie.
I just wanted to kind of comment on what Marlene said. I did have empathy for him. I think he was very human in his good and his bad qualities. And I think he did raise his standard of life up from where his father was. But I was wondering on the porch step if he was just manipulating Rose because he knew he knew how good she was. And if he kind of played his cards right, she would take him in. And I was like, yeah. Anyway, I just kind of had that realization. And I think it was because I just finished watching the movie this morning. And when he was sitting out there, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a nice place to go talk to the baby.
Interesting. So he was just playing Rose. A lot of people have their hands up, and I'm going to keep a list, but let me show you all the collage from Romare Bearden that actually inspired the play, and because it provides context at this point. Let's see if I can share the screen and go back there. Go to my field notes, and it's here. I'm trying
I
to.
just lost my.
Do y'all see this?
It's small.
Yes.
Let's see if I can make it big.
I wonder, Ray, if you open it in another tab, sometimes, so if you right click and then click open image in a new tab, which is right above the save image as.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
not the link, just, or maybe the link will work, but you can open the image itself in a new tab.
Right.
There. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And then if it's able
And then
to
it's
be.
it's in the tab. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a collage from Romare Bearden, and it's called Mr. Seth and Miss Bertha. And you're gonna see how this image actually inspired two plays, because Mr. Seth and Miss Bertha are the owners and landlords of the rooming house in Joe Turner's Come and Gone. But look at what Mr. Seth has in his hands.
Baby.
See the baby girl?
Mhm.
And it's clear that Miss Bertha is not really, well, she has her hand on Mr. Seth's shoulder, but she's not touching the baby. It's almost like the collage is suggesting that the man is bringing the baby home from somewhere outside, and the woman is not smiling, the guy is not smiling. And this is when August Wilson saw this in a catalog in a catalog of the exhibition that was playing at the time. He was inspired to make this Troy and Rose in Fences, but he also made it Mr. Seth and Miss Bertha in Joe Turner's Come and Gone. So I'm going to stop the share and come back. Now who was next? Paula? Maybe?
Bernard.
Yeah.
Bernard.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, it's such an interesting discussion. So I'm trying to figure out where to plug in. But one thing is that it occurs to me that we got a lot of
We
wind
got a
blowing
lot of
in.
wind here, so.
Yeah, there's a storm outside, but that Troy is jealous of both of his sons. They've both got some talent,
Mhm.
and they're trying to make the most of it. And it's something that he was never able to do. And he has an illusion that he would have been a great baseball player. I mean, Sonny reinforces that idea, but that's in hindsight. This is long after Troy would have had a chance, and that chance would have come while he was in prison, because by the time he got out of prison, not only was he too old, where was he going to have really got the baseball skills? And and while this is obscure, the George Selkirk reference, this is the guy who replaced Babe Ruth. And Selkirk played during the 30s, and his career ended in 42. So, well, that's not important to the play. It's just tells you something about Troy's perception of when things are going on. Yeah, I was better than that guy. So Troy's thinking about some player who's playing in the 30s, not somebody who's at Jackie Robinson's time in 1947 or the current time, 1957. So he's completely removed and so jealous of his sons, he's not going to let them succeed. He's going to put up a fence for them because, damn it, he had fences for him.
Yes, yes. Miriam.
Well, I guess, to me, I still see Troy in heroic terms. And I guess to me, that's the definition of, a hero in a way, because he is so, there's a reason why all these people are following him kind of, or are involved in his life. And I think it's because he is, as I said before, so charismatic and like a magnet. There's something in his storytelling and the way he operates as a larger than life kind of figure. And I thought the best article I read this morning that you had sent to us was this article, I think it was by Friedman. It was just, where it kind of puts Wilson in the whole canon of great dramatists. And because so often, I kind of was raised with Willie Loman and Arthur Miller, and, always that speech at the end that the wife gives, no one should say this man wasn't honorable, despite he too was a very flawed kind of character. And yet there was some reason to believe in the magnificence of this person, despite his flaws. And this article by Friedman really kind of said, not comparable to Willie Loman, Troy is, but more so to Lear. And I thought that was really, right on, because Lear also has all these flaws. The hero has to kind of be brought down, or the person everybody kind of looks to, and their own foibles sort of is what brings them down. And so in Lear, the blindness that he ends up succumbing to is because of his own blindness in not seeing everybody around him. And so somehow I really liked that comparison. And I thought that is what sort of brings up August Wilson into the canon of the greatest playwrights, because he so magnificently writes about Troy, but you don't see Troy as just, I don't know, you just see him as a very human. Maybe he isn't as noble as, the others, but the other heroes, but there is something that really draws people to him. So
Yeah.
I guess the one other thing I wanted to say was that I remember, Ray, you wrote to us in one of your notes about how it was hard for you to not understand why the boy, Corey, couldn't say yes, sir, in getting through the stairs or whatever, getting
Excuse me.
past.
Excuse me. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's saying, excuse me, that's right. He said, well, I think it's because he had said so many yes, sirs in his life to Troy that, this was the sort of final, his growth, Corey, is finally being able to take on his father. And I did not agree with, you said that your wife is trying to explain to you why you could be so upset with Corey for not doing that. But it was like the next generation is finally going to show up Troy for, his weaknesses, or I'm not putting it right, but anyway, which I think you already know, but I did not feel, the fight would have been, if he had said what Troy wanted him to say, there wouldn't have been the fight, but there needed to be the fight at that point. That was sort of the catalyst of everything at that moment for Corey being able to move on with his life. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah. One of the it's interesting. Troy's an interesting character, and when you pair Troy, the written character, with a really overpowering actor, it's a 1-2 punch. So that when you see Denzel Washington as Troy, or James Earl Jones as Troy, and I've seen them both on stage, then it's overwhelming. When you see someone who's less overpowering in terms of their star quality portraying Troy, then I think you get a much more nuanced view of who Troy is, notwithstanding the star quality of who may be playing Troy. And that's a lot of words, but the net effect is that we walk away with different impressions depending on how big a star portrays Troy, as opposed to someone who's more local.
Can I just respond real quickly to that?
Yes.
I agree with you. That's a really good point. And to that point, when I saw a clip from James Earl Jones with Corey, I think it was the like scene or something. Do you like me? It was too much. I mean, even though he's a great actor, James Earl Jones, it was like he was too big and Corey was too small. And so it wasn't balanced. At least with Denzel Washington, it did feel a little bit more balanced.
Yeah. Matt and Marlene.
Yeah, so something that struck me was the like lectures that Troy gave to his sons about economics and sort of, what the cost of a TV really equals, and then all of the stuff about the $10 with Lions. And it got me thinking, in the beginning of the play, there's some background information that touches on the success of European immigrants in Pittsburgh around this time and in the early 20th century, in terms of being working in the mills and other factories, and how Black Americans who migrated there from the South didn't have the same economic opportunity made available to them. And so when we think about Troy, who's working full time and perhaps barely getting by, was not able to pay with his own quote unquote earned money that the house that they live in, is struggling to get the driver position, which will have a higher pay rate, and in struggling to do so, risking his job, if he gets terminated for making protestations about that, there's no Title VII Civil Rights Act at the time in 1957. That'll happen in the next decade. And so he might not have a federal claim if he's discriminated against in the context of employment because of his race. And if he has a collective bargaining agreement that covers him, you know, any remedy through that will hinge on his union filing and processing a grievance to arbitration. And, you know, this is a time where unions had you know, engaged in discriminatory practices at a larger scale than they do today, from what I understand. And so I think that kind of context, I don't think it's a sort of complete redemption, right, of Troy and his the way that he treated Rose, for example. But I think that, you know, I think that context is also important for understanding, you know, why he was perhaps so, you know, serious about the economics.
Thanks, Matt. Matt, how Marlene, and then Glenna, did I see your name up? Okay, Marlene, and then Rosalie.
That was a good point Matt brought up. So I'm glad you brought that up, because yeah, that does play a factor. Speaking of economics, you know, one of the things, Troy was very flawed, but one of the things, I know folks that think like Troy in terms of what they want their children to do when they become adults. I grew up in DC, and you know what I heard? Get a good government job. So not come home. If you wanted to work in the theater industry, I'm sure if I came home and told my parents I want to be an actor or singer or dancer, my dad would have said, honey, you need to get a good government job. So, and Troy wanted both of his sons to especially Lion. He wanted Lion to why don't you come work with me? I can put in a word for you. And I understand that mindset. Just get a job where you're going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks. I don't care what kind of work it is. It's honorable in terms you're going to get paid something. And he had a lot of fear with Corey. So I guess I'm rethinking. He loved his sons. Unfortunately, he just didn't know how. He didn't know nurturing because he didn't get any. But people can learn it even though they don't grow up with it. But he didn't know nurturing. He didn't know how to support his sons or encourage them, because when Lion got that gig at the prominent jazz spot, and he said, well, Dad, just come down for a little while. Nah, I don't have time. I got to go to work. But he could hang out and do other things, but he wouldn't, you know, he said that Lion was lazy and didn't want to do this and that, but he wouldn't go support him on that one thing. So I think if they had pursued traditional type jobs, he would have been happy with that. Not saying that is right, but I think that was his mindset.
Yeah. Rosalie, and then Ed and Pat.
Yeah, a couple of things. Well, you know, he expressed early on that he wanted Corey to, you know, be educated and make something of himself, but yet he wouldn't see the recruiter, and he wouldn't sign on to his getting the scholarship and going to college where he could have bettered himself. I thought that was kind of, you know, a dual message there. But I wanted to mention that, and I don't know if it was 60 Minutes or where I saw it, but I saw an interview with Wilson, and he said his art and his writing came first, before family, before anything. And I was just wondering if that informed his writing about his portrayal of Troy as a father who was not really interested or involved, or a nurturing father. And he really didn't participate except as a disciplinarian and being patriarchal and autocratic. So I just wanted to mention that.
I'm glad you did. Thanks, Rosalie, because I wanted to kind of sneak in the idea that you all know that I'm doing this 100 Days of Dante, where we read a new canto every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I've got 3 or 4 different translations, and I look at 3 or 4 different videos from different professors, and I'm really, really getting into it. And it spills over into other things. And one of the spillovers from Dante into August Wilson is the whole idea in terms of analyzing text that we have August Wilson, the poet, the playwright. But we also have August Wilson, the pilgrim, just like Dante. Just like Dante was a pilgrim going through in the Inferno, Purgatory, Paradise. He was a pilgrim, but he was also a poet, an observer. And from time to time, he'll have an apostrophe. He'll say, "Oh, you readers, blah 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 blah." He'll switch from being the pilgrim to being the poet. I think August Wilson's doing some of that. I think that, and I'd like to kind of trace that in the rest of the plays of August Wilson, the pilgrim, in this sort of development as a playwright, development as a person, and August Wilson, the poet, who's just the observer, who's the reporter. The Lair article gives some specific and interesting insights from the wife, from Constanza Romero, about how she feels that she's not getting quite the emotional input she should be getting from Wilson. And that sort of feeds into what Rosalie just mentioned about he really puts the writing first and makes everything else secondary, and that's how he does it. But we can talk some more about that. Ed and then Pat.
You know, I really wanted to second what Marlene said on 2 counts, both with Corey and with Lyons. First of all, with Corey, it wasn't football that he sabotaged. It was recruitment to college that he sabotaged. I mean, we don't know that Corey was going to be a great football player, but we knew he might have gotten a scholarship to college at that point. And there were plenty of people who could get scholarships to college who never, in some of the big colleges, they don't even make the team. But once they get the scholarship, they're there and get the education. So, I mean, the venality of some of the things that he did was enormous. So I just wanted to agree with Marlene on that. And I was really struck by that passage at the very beginning of the play. I'm just going to find it. I'll remind you of it, where Lion says, "You and me is 2 different people, Pop." And Troy says, "I learned by my mistakes." And he's trying to get, I totally agree. I mean, again, with what Marlene said, that parents faced with a child who is artistic and wants to be artistic have to face that with the idea of you're either going to support them or you're going to try to sabotage them. And I'm old enough to have seen parents who've done both things. And for a child to make it in a world of art, it takes a long time. There's a long investment involved, and it may not pay off, which obviously Troy thinks it could never possibly pay off. But even you pointed out that this club was a place where great people came out of. And I did get the impression, again, that he was a good trumpet player. I didn't get the impression that he was a lousy trumpet player. I just got the impression that he couldn't get his father to even come and watch him play. And that's a really important thing for an artist, to get that kind of support from the parents. And then, of course, at the end, when he tells Rose that it's all his fault. I cared too much about you. I should have been caring about myself. That was like the third major relationship that he really shows his himself. And so I find it hard to really sympathize with the guy, even though I do recognize that he has every reason in the world to be the way he is. He still is the way he is. And that's kind of what I felt.
Yep. Pat and then Madeline.
I've got kind of two completely unrelated things.
Sure.
I agree with you that Rose had reason to believe that Troy was having an affair because he says he's going down to Taylor's to watch the game. And then he comes back from Taylor's and he doesn't know anything about the store. So he's clearly somewhere else. I mean, she doesn't know that he's having a baby with some other woman, but she's got reason to question it. And I'm also interested in the fact when the character description first comes up about Rose, it talks about how she, gave up if it wasn't for her relationship with Troy, maybe it would have been a series of men who were maybe not as stable as Troy or the church or whatever. And then later in the play, after she knows about Raynell, she's in hard for the church. And I'm interested in that. And I'm also interested, I wonder about the relationship between Troy and Rose in the years after they adopt Raynell and Troy's death. I mean, at the end of the play, she's telling Corey to essentially forgive his father, or at least accept the good things along with the bad. And I'm really wondering what their relationship was in those years, because the last time we see it, she's going off to the church with her cakes. He asks her when she's coming back, and she's basically saying, well, what do you care when I'm coming back? I come back when I come back. Okay. And on an unrelated note, the athletes thing. And I know you sent along some article, and I can't remember which one it was, but apparently it was August Wilson's view that sports scholarships for Black kids were not such a good deal. And I mean, I know that's a controversy more recently, but from my own perspective, and I mean, this might be a little bit interesting, but I have one son who's a musician and another son who was a baseball player. And my son, who was a baseball player, got into it kind of late in the day. And these days, people start playing baseball at a really young age. But my son got into it kind of late, and he started off when he went into competitive baseball on a largely Black team. And he continued that throughout high school. And then he went to an HBCU to play baseball in college. And then he got injured. He made the team, but he got injured. And then there was the pandemic. So he's not there anymore. But anyway, I mean, from my own personal experience, we know all kinds of baseball players and their families. And the goal of the dads has been, my kid should get a scholarship so he can go to college. And it's not because, and in baseball, and I'm sure it was completely different in the mid to late 1950s, because the number of scholarships available is way limited at this point. But the idea was their kid would go play baseball in college. He'd go to college. He would, get a tuition discount or whatever it was. But they would be really proud that their kid was a college baseball player.
That's really unique insights. Thank you for that, Pat. Madeline, why don't you go ahead, and then Corinne.
This may be a bit
We're not done.
stream of consciousness.
Another hour? Less than an hour?
Let's 40 minutes.
Might be stream of consciousness, but in Jitney, Becker wanted Booster to be better.
Mm.
He wanted the best for his son, but it seems like Troy doesn't really want his sons to be better. He just wants them to have responsibility and to earn money, so he doesn't really have to take care of them anymore. I think he's overcome by his responsibilities in a way. He talks about responsibility. He talks about why he's done things because he has to. And I don't find him heroic. He's a flawed character. He's charismatic, he's a leader, but we all know from recent times that that doesn't make you a hero. It makes you a hero to some, but it doesn't necessarily make you what I would think of as a hero. So that's my stream of consciousness rant about Troy.
Well, speaking of stream of consciousness, it's never too soon or too late to actually connect the plays we've already done with the present play, and I think that's a good methodology. For example, we've seen the name Bono before. Who remembers when we saw Bono the last time? In Jitney, when the guys were talking about what they were going to do at the Jitney station closes, and I think it's Turnbull who says that Bono has cancer, and he's going to give up his car. And I may be able to get on with the company that Bono works for. And that's not to say it's the same, that's not to say that it is or is not the same Bono, but our Bono is in the 50s and Jitney's in the 70s. It may well be. It's interesting that in Jitney, there was a character, Fillmore, whose wife had abandoned him and took all the furniture. And when he came home, there was an empty house, and it was traumatic for him. And in Ma Rainey, the same thing happened to Toledo, where the wife pulled out, left, and the husband was traumatized. And of course, we know this is something that happened to August Wilson in his life with his first marriage. But I think that has some bearing on the fact that emotionally and morally, Rose abandoned the marriage when she took on Raynell. Of course, as I put in my notes, my wife has accused me of being too sympathetic to Troy, and I have to caveat things with that. But another thing about Troy that I can't quite get away from is that everything that Troy says he can't do, whether it's moving up in the garbage world, moving up in baseball, everything that Troy fails at and blames other things for, you always have to bear in mind that Troy is illiterate. Troy cannot read or write. And Lyons even says, when Troy announces that he has the job as a driver and he has to get his license, Lyons said, "Pop, it'd be great if you could read." I think that August Wilson is sending us a signal, and you know, this is my big thing, my big theory that I haven't seen sort of pulled out anywhere. That August Wilson's big enemy in life, or big source of opposition for people, for Black people, for any people, is that they don't learn functional literacy. They never attain functional literacy. And if you can't read or write, it doesn't matter the degree to which you're affected by racism or anything else. If you can't read or write, you're not going to move ahead. And so we need to look at what Troy says he wasn't able to accomplish from the lens of his illiteracy. we should also look at Troy's idea about his sons and their futures from the aspect of his inability to read or write. Not to mention what he does to Gabriel, his brother, because he can't read the document. So these are things to keep in mind. Corinne and Paula, Bernard, and Miriam.
Well, I didn't like Troy much, but I had to think about what was cruel and selfish in me too. So that took a little delving into. Yeah, we all have moments of things that we're not really proud of. So I could relate to him in that. But I also wanted to say, in the 1950s, the woman's job was to cook and clean, and we see her in the film anyway, hanging up clothes all the time. So I had a feeling she took care of Gabe while Gabe lived there. That was one of her responsibilities. And then just one other thing is Troy doesn't die on stage the way in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Yeah.
Toledo dies on stage. So I just thought, just some interesting comparisons.
Troy doesn't die on stage. For that matter, neither does Becker. We hear of his death in the factory, but we don't see it. We see Toledo die. We see him breathe his last breath. It's an interesting sort of juxtaposition. Miriam. Okay, Paula and Bernard.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm here. I just was muted.
Okay.
I think for me, there was a comparison between Troy and Levy in terms of how the past, overcomes their ability to, thrive in life. But I also wanted to say, when I think it was Marlene who was talking about parents and their children and their expectations. A lot of, again, sort of in Troy's defense, it's true that parents should have aspirations for their children to be able to go beyond what they have done. But at the same time, I think they see the harshness of the world around them. And so they want more than anything for their children to have a measure of security. And so I think that's what Marlene was saying about what she was told. My parents were immigrants. And so in a similar way, my mother told me, and also in addition, I'm a girl. So she told me I could be a teacher or a nurse. And then it was interesting because when I became a teacher, my father told me that I could also, because I had vacation during winter, that during those 2 weeks, I could apply to the post office and work for the post office in my spare time there. And there was always that feeling and I ended up working for a county. So there was always that feeling impressed on me about security, and that music and art were avocations, not vocations. That's literally what my mother used to say. So, I think in defense of parents who had come from a difficult background, and of course, I thought it was interesting at the very beginning of the play, there's a description by August Wilson about the difference between that the immigrants had hardship coming in, but because they were white, they had, more benefits and less struggles even than the African Americans. So I thought it was interesting that he began the play with that description to set the tone. But anyway, I just would say people who come from hardships want good things for their children, but they also don't understand that they're limiting their children by their own fears.
Paula and Bernard. Paula.
I just had a couple brief things I wanted to bring up, and that was, it seemed to me that both fathers, Becker and Troy, needed to die to move the play forward. they are the ones who can't change. They're mired in the past in a way, and how they wanted things to be. They couldn't reframe or rethink or imagine another their sons' lives, especially. And of course, Troy couldn't really imagine Rose's either. But you know, Corey says to him, "Dad, these are new times," you know, and I think Becker was like that as well. One thing I just wanted to throw out to everybody, because I'd be curious to know what you thought, and that is Rose, after Troy dies, she has this speech where she explains to Corey why she ended up with Troy. It's a very moving speech. And she says, "I wanted a house that I could sing in, and that's what your daddy gave me. I didn't know to keep up his strength, I had to give up little pieces of mine. I did that. I took on his life as mine and mixed up the pieces so that you couldn't hardly tell which was which anymore. It was my choice." Do you think it was her choice? Was that the choice I mean, I know for a lot of women in the 50s, late 40s, that felt like their choice, you know? I just wondered what your thinking was on that.
I see some nods. Rosalie.
Well, early on, she did say in the book that, I mean, in the play somewhere, that if she hadn't married Troy, she would have been with an abusive man, been on the streets. She gave 4 or 5 examples of where she'd be if she didn't choose Troy. And I want to mention one other thing, and that, to me, I would characterize Troy as an anti-hero. And look what he did to Gabe. I mean, that was so awful. You know, here this man was devastated from the war and with a metal plate in his head. And what does Troy do? He takes his $3,000 when he comes out of the army, the settlement, plus what money that came after, and exploited his brother. That was added insult to injury, I think. But I will say this, he did recognize it, because he said if it wasn't for Gabe's money, he wouldn't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out of. So I'll leave you with that.
Yep. Laurie.
I thinking about Rose and that speech with Corey. That's an interesting question about the choice, and I don't have an answer on that. But what I felt like when she was doing that, it was her telling Corey, it's okay to let go of your anger towards your dad. And it hit me. He was the only one of the adults. Well, even right now, in my perfect world dream, Troy was more nurturing to Raynell. Somehow I feel that. You know, she knew the dog song, and it was Rose's way of letting Corey let go of his anger toward his dad. But he was the only one that didn't get to see his dad in his glory, because Lion talked about going to a baseball game.
Yeah.
And seeing it, you know, get shot out of the park and knowing kind of where his dad's came from. And I thought that was like, wow. And I think that, I think as a parent, oftentimes our kids don't know who we are because we don't share enough about where we came from or whatever. I mean, some people do, but I think a lot of people don't. They see us from, you know, when they're teenagers on, and boy, that's not a great time for objectivity on their part. And we have a hard time seeing where they've come from. They don't bring to this world all the crap that the rest of us do.
Yeah.
From whatever it is that we grew up with. So that's all.
Sheila, Madeline, and then Paula again.
I just wanted to say a couple of quick things. One, I totally agree with the comments about Rose's the way she was explaining to Corey how she ended up with Troy, and that she saw Troy as the hero. And when I say that I see Troy as a hero, I don't mean that what he did was right. I think what he did was horribly hurtful, but understandable. there was another part to that that I wanted to get. Well, about the now, it really seemed as though Troy spent time and loved and was able to love Raynell differently than he loved his boys. But the part that made me cry was when Raynell and Corey were singing at the end, the dog song. That for me brought the people really together and really kind of tied up the really sad but also beautiful story in many ways.
Yep, yep. Madeline.
I know I was down on Troy, but there was one thing that hit me in the play when he was talking to Corey about whether or not he liked him. He said, "Don't you try and go through life worrying about if somebody like you or not. You best be making sure they're doing right by you." And I thought, well, that was really good advice.
Yeah.
It's a lesson.
Yeah.
Important.
And then I agreed with Marlene. I grew up in Pittsburgh and my father was first generation immigrant. And we too were told that we should get government jobs for security. And what did all three of us do? We got government jobs. So that's that.
Yeah. Paul and Bernard.
Yeah, to shift gears a minute, something that interested me that you, Ray, referred to in one of the notes that you sent out that we haven't touched on is the prison experience, which is in so many of the plays. And what we don't see is a character who's a recidivist. What we see is characters who've come out of prison and kind of learned their lesson or whatever, know enough not to go back to prison anyway, even if they're going to risk it with semi-legal activities. But and some of them, like Booster and like Troy, spent a long time there. And if we're talking prison in Alabama, we're talking chain gangs in the early, in mid-century and before that.
Yeah.
And it's a really harsh and rough experience. And it's so clearly Wilson who obviously did not go to prison himself, has a fascination with how that's kind of a, pardon the pun, finishing school. It's okay, they come out long time, they're a brand new person after this. This is where life begins. So I'm just kind of curious, Ray, maybe you could address this as to why this prison experience you think is well, it's clearly part of the general Black experience, is in terms of demographics and who's in prison, why this is so important to Wilson.
Yeah, it's almost as if it were a rite of passage.
Yes.
For the people who get involved in it. I mean, you hear all these numbers about Black prisons being disproportionate to the Black population, but what you don't hear are numbers that would suggest that a large number of any ethnic group end up going to prison. And I would guess that in any given neighborhood or town, the number of people who actually end up being incarcerated is a small number. But it's interesting that those who do in August Wilson's world are truly rehabilitated, and as you mentioned, Bernard, they don't commit crimes again, and they don't go back to jail again because they've learned their lessons. Of course, we've only seen Fences in the 50s, Ma Rainey in the 30s, 20s, and Jitney in the 70s, where Booster actually went to prison in the late 50s and gets out in the 70s. So I think we'll see in later plays that people are not rehabilitated, that the incarceration and jail become a kind of a repetitive thing, and they do their time, they get out, and they look for and they commit crimes that get them ended up in jail again if they live. Related to, and not necessarily related, and kind of off the wall, is a particular monologue by Troy that I'd like for you to pay attention to because we're going to see it again. Troy's talking to Rose, and he says, "Rose, I done tried all my life to live decent, to live a clean, hard, useful life. I tried to be a good husband to you in every way I knew how. Maybe I come into the world backwards, I don't know. But you're born with 2 strikes on you before you come to the plate. You got to guard it closely, always looking for the curveball on the inside corner, blah, 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 blah." He's always using these baseball metaphors. Anyway, he gives this speech about how he may have made mistakes, and he goes through a kind of a progression. And you're going to see that again in 7 Guitars. And you saw a preview of it actually in Youngblood in Jitney, where when he's talking with Rena about the things that he's done perhaps wrong, but that he had good intentions. So I hope you'll pay attention to that and see that in other in future plays. The other thing that I wanted to get in to squeeze in before we finish, 2 things. One, it was interesting, and you may have seen in my notes about the producers and investors who really wanted August Wilson to take the piece with Gabriel out of the end of the play. And it got to the point that this one investor, Carol Shorstein, who had invested like $800,000 in getting the play to Broadway, fired the director because he wouldn't change the play. And August Wilson said, "Well, you can fire the director. That's within your range of things to do, but I have to approve of any new director that you bring on." And in the end, the play didn't change. Gabriel blew his horn, as weird as it was, and the crowds received it well. So that was kind of interesting, an example of big money trying to push things around and the artist actually succeeding. Another interesting story, and I think I may have included it in my notes, and I know I talked about it with the San Francisco State class, was the fact that the last conflict between Corey and Troy, y'all might have noticed Corey drew back a baseball bat and was going to hit his father, and his father wrestled him to the ground, and they had words. Well, in the original end of the play, Corey swung at his father, and Troy took out a gun and cocked back the handle. But at the same time that the play was being rehearsed, guess what actually happened in real life? You all may remember. Marvin Gaye had a big argument with his father, who was a preacher, about his lifestyle.
Right, killed.
And his father killed him. That was the end of Marvin Gaye. That was the end of the Motown legend. And so, when it got back to the rehearsal, the people in the company said, "We can't have this play with Troy drawing a gun on Corey right after Reverend Gaye has shot and killed Marvin Gaye." And so they pull it out and they rework it, and it all works out to the good. Interesting dynamics. Okay, I'm gonna pause. We have Sheila, Madeline, Bernard, and Miriam. Sheila, you're up.
So I remembered the other thing that I wanted to say, and that was I want to respectfully disagree with whoever thought that Troy was being abusive to Gabe by using his money and buying a house. If you remember, Gabe and Troy were the only two people in their family who were family still. They were the only ones that were in touch with each other. And Gabe went away and lost half of his head. And it was obviously traumatic for everybody. And clearly, Gabe could not have managed to get his own housing and take care of himself. Poor people do things like that. I worked as a social worker for 50 years, and people do what they have to do to try to take care of each other. I saw it as an extremely loving thing. His goal was that Gabe would live with him forever, and that he would have a roof over his head. And I thought that was an extremely loving thing. Anyway, that's the other thing I'd almost forgotten about.
Madeline.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention before, but you had talked about the different actors in the role of Troy. Denzel Washington almost made him more likable and sympathetic.
Yeah.
I thought. I never saw James Earl Jones in that role, but that was just my impression of that. But I'll throw something else out there that I was thinking about was the play ends in the early 60s and Corey is in the military. Is he going to go to Vietnam and wind up like Gabe? And I'll leave you with that terrible, sad thought.
Yeah. It's 1965, and Corey has finished a 6-year hitch. We have to hope that he goes and does something else, because otherwise he'll go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And if he goes to Vietnam, the
Yeah.
chances are he will not survive that one way or the other.
Right.
But yeah, that's a good
Right.
point. Miriam, and then Paula and Bernard. Okay, Barbara.
Well,
I got you.
what I was going is based on what some of your comments, Ray. And the only one that still I remember is that Carol Shorenstein is kind of the guru here in San Francisco of Broadway music, Broadway music theater. Yeah, she's been, the Shorenstein family has been very involved in musical theater, but I had never, until I read that and then heard you talk about it, I had never known that. So obviously she was, as an investor, she was very focused on, the public and, how they would take this. Oh, now I remember what I wanted to say, how they would take the ending of that. But I have to say, especially because I've never seen the play other than the scenes that you recommended us to see. So I did see the film. And I love the end of the film, because the heavens kind of parted and it really connected in with how Troy was always, yelling against God. And that's, I think, another characteristic in some of the other plays. It comes up in Ma Rainey also with Levy, yelling because he didn't believe in God, and that there's a whole speech there. And so in this one too, Troy's constantly taking on God. And so I thought how he, so all I know is that it was beautiful at the very end when, Gabriel managed, to me, it was like the Rams horn in high holiday services for Jews, when that horn finally did blow, despite his difficult attempts to do so. And then you looked at the skies and knew that Troy was there, probably continuing to fight with God. But anyway, I thought it was a beautiful ending.
That's very interesting about Carol Shorenstein and her role right now in the San Francisco area. I got that anecdote from Professor Sandra Shannon, who's a retired professor at Howard, but who has written this book, The Dramatic Vision of August Wilson. And she has a lot of first-hand, first-party original research, including the longest face-to-face interview with August Wilson that she's published in her book. She has some remarkable insights. Please, you folks in San Francisco, don't go tell Karen Shorenstein I said anything bad about her. I'm just reporting what I've read, but this happened. This happened.
Yeah.
Paula, Matt, you're next.
I just wanted to actually mention something that Gabriel brings up. And that is another trope is that there's somebody in each of the plays who's really familiar with scripture. And we get a lot of that, and we're going to see it again in Piano Lesson. There's, August Wilson's ongoing battle with the Judeo-Christian God or traditional religion, whatever, however you want to frame that. But it seems to be something he wants to inject into every play. He seems to really want to pick his spots where he wants to rely on scripture.
Yep.
Just because there's going to be somebody who's quoting it.
Yeah.
And then when we get Gabriel, the archangel, who's, of course, otherworldly is out of his head to end this, then the play. I mean, it just, I don't know, it's just one of those ongoing, as I said, tropes. I find it very interesting.
Yeah. Riley Temple, who's an attorney here in Washington, but is also an August Wilson scholar, of course, has written a book called Aunt Esther's Children Redeemed. And in his book, he talks about the Wilson Warriors, but he talks about the person who plays the role of oracle in each play. So that's something to watch for. In each play, there's an oracle. There's someone who gets the wisdom straight from a divine source and brings it in. And it's interesting that when Troy is having the come to Jesus talk with Rose about his indiscretion, he's giving these baseball metaphors, and all the while Gabe is there talking about something that's completely unrelated, but that sort of informs the whole thing. So it's worth looking at. But Bernard is right. We're going to see more people, more scripture reciters, more oracles in future plays. Matt, you're up.
Yeah, so I wanted to return to, I think, what Paula raised about that quote from Rose about choice. And later I want to go back and review that passage again, because I think that word choice is so powerful because it's related to autonomy, self-determination, dignity. And I think those qualities are, really are outstanding in Rose's character.
Agency. Yep.
And agency.
Yep.
And I think I want to draw, when I think about choice, I really want to take that as granted, right? To really value, her assertion, her sort of last word on the matter that, for all of this is, her choice, her choice. And then I think that there's a line from that to, her choice to raise Raynell. And so I want to think about this, her character as in connection with motherhood and mothers and the importance and the, I think, what is due mothers for what they do, which is one of my main political concerns. So.
Thanks, Matt. Barbara and then Corinne.
So I didn't understand, why did the investors want to change the end of the play, take Gabe out of it? I didn't understand.
Because they thought it was kind of hokey. They thought it was kind of contrived, the way Gabriel blew the horn and the gates parted and no noise came out of the horn. They thought it was just too contrived. Actually, I thought it worked out well in the sense that it was a spiritual thing that Gabriel went through, and eventually he blew the gates open. But the investors were dead set against it.
So they didn't get their way, right?
They did not get their way.
Good.
But they did fire Lord Richards as director.
Too bad.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Corinne, then Madeline.
So I want to echo something Miriam said about the future generation, because I think that that's one of the parting scenes where Raynell and Corey are singing not the father's song, but the father taught it to them, but the grandfather's
That's
song.
right.
Who
That's
woke
right.
up. So, so there's this echoing of fathers as the bonding element between these two children of Troy's. It was just so interesting to me to see that as one of the near the end.
Mhm. The intergenerationality of the play is interesting. It's something that Riley Temple brings out in On Esther's Children Redeemed. Raynell is 7. Corey is 24. Lyons is 41. And Troy is in his 60s at his death. So there are 4 generations. If you look at the generations being separated by 17 years, there's 4 generations, plus the song that they sing is, as Corinne correctly points out, is the song of their grandfather, of Troy's father, not of Troy, although Troy sang the song. So we're talking 5 generations, intergenerationality, if there's such a word, and continuity across those age levels. Really interesting.
Good info.
Okay, final words. Anybody have anything they've been wanting to say and I haven't called their name, or you haven't raised your hand? Last call. Yes, Rosalie.
I guess as a final, to come back to the title Fences,
Mhm.
and I think you sort of mentioned, or somebody did, that, the family is, except for Troy, the family is intact and within the fence.
Mhm. Mhm. Edward.
And Bono would refer to fences can keep people in, not just keep people out.
Right, right.
And are we to
And so-
assume that God came to the front, or whoever came to the front door to take Troy to his death? Because he referred to that.
He said that Satan came to the front door.
Satan, right. You're right, Satan.
Speaking of the front door, you all remember it was Mr. Rand who what was Mr. Rand's role in
The
Fences?
union,
Mr. Rand, the union. But wasn't Mr. Rand the landlord in Jitney who threatened to take the house? Heaven forbid it's the same Mr. Rand, and let's hope it wasn't even his son. But the name Rand comes up again and again and again. Ed.
Yeah, so I'm, we've had long conversations about Troy and his attitudes and the children and whatnot. And I was just going to end it with my own speculation, and I have no idea what the answer to the question would be, but I'm imagining if Corey came 20 years later to be Colin Powell, and Lyons came to be Wynton Marsalis, would Troy have been a proud parent, or would he have been resentful still?
Well, it's an interesting question.
I don't know the answer, but
Yeah.
it keeps on coming to my head.
It's an interesting question. We don't know that much about Colin Powell's father. We do know that Wynton Marsalis' father was a musician, Ellis Marsalis, who was known in New Orleans as a musician and a teacher. It's an interesting question. Marlene.
I guess I thought we would talk more about Rose, maybe because she was my favorite character. That woman, to take in another woman's child and raise it, that your husband had an affair with, and I love the scene when Troy told her how she didn't crumble. She was strong, hearing all of that horrific information Troy gave her. It's no wonder Viola won an award for the Academy Award for it, but
Best actress. Yep.
I think she did anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yep, best actress.
I thought Rose, I don't know if I could do what Rose did. I don't know. I mean, I just thought what she did, I probably would, I don't know. And I just thought Rose's character, to take on what she had to deal with was just phenomenal, that August Wilson could write that in the play.
Yeah, yeah. Pat and then Laurie. Go ahead, Pat.
I like this play a lot. I was really struck with the father-son relationship, just as with the father-son relationship in Jitney, but this was a bit more interesting to me. But also the husband-wife dynamic. And, you know, I am struck by how much Rose did and, you know, how she coped with her husband having a baby with another woman and then took that baby in and raised her. I mean, that was really impressive, but I think she was a really interesting character who was honestly quite very well written by August Wilson, who's known as a playwright who writes Black male characters so well. But this was a woman character, and I thought she was compelling.
I agree.
Laurie, we're running out of time, but Laurie, go ahead.
I'll make it quick. I agree with Marlene. Thank you for bringing her up. I think we could have a whole session on her. But she did say that part of the reason she did it is she did want more kids, and this was kind of that blessing. And that was beautiful. But I also think she maybe was raised that way because she talked about all of the halves and the my papa and your mama. And she took that and said, you know, let's move forward. And that's okay. You know, anyway, loved her too.
Yep. One last thing, and we're gonna have to close out. Here's what another thing I've that has spilled over from my reading of Dante to August Wilson. I'd like to share with you all, and hopefully we can take a look at things from this vantage point in future plays. At some point, Dante wrote an essay about his writing of the Divine Comedy. And he mentioned that there are 4 levels, 4 layers, 4 approaches to understanding things. He talks about the literal, the moral, the allegorical, and the spiritual or mystical. I think we in the plays to come, let's look at what's on the surface, the superficial, the literal. Let's also look at the moral, the allegorical, what it means, and the spiritual, mystical, and sort of look at the plays from that frame of reference. And we may see some other things may jump out at us. It's 5:53. We're past the time, but if anybody has one last thing, we can have you say it. Pat, is your hand up? Marlene, is your hand up?
Not mine.
Nope. Okay. So the next play is Joe Turner's Coming Gone. Yes, Corinne.
I'm saying goodbye.
All right. The next play is Joe Turner's Coming Gone. Let's continue to plow forward. I'll be sending a bunch of stuff out. Oh, one more thing. I'm not going to be here the Sunday after Thanksgiving. We decided to go to North Carolina for that, for the Thanksgiving weekend. So is it okay with everybody if we kind of push everything up a week beyond and take that week off? It's going to mean that we're going to take us into the 3rd week of December. But what you got to do, you got to do. All right, so
problem.
Watch your inboxes. I'll be sending you stuff. Joe Turner's Coming Gone. Have a great week, y'all.
Thanks again.
Bye, everybody.
You too.
Good class. Thank you. Good
Thank
discussion.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you very much.